Hello and welcome to our 2025 session on empathic dialogue. Today we will have three presenters joining us, Dr. Reverend Eliana Ah-Rum, Dr. Michael William Draghi, and Sister Yen Do. They will be presenting their papers back to back, followed by a question and answer period in which I will invite the presenters to enter into a dialogue with each other. I will be introducing each presenter before their respective papers. Our first presenter is Dr. Eliana Ah-Rum. Eliana Ah-Rum is Assistant Professor of Homiletics at the Graduate School of Practical Theology in South Korea. With the Theology of Lament and Hospitality, her scholarship engages post-colonial feminist and Asian immigrant perspectives, epistemic justice, multicultural settings, ecological justice, mental health, and trauma, and intertextual and interdisciplinary approaches. Feel free to start when you're ready, Eliana.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Today, I want to share with you a project that begins with a simple question. How do we create space for ethical dialogue in a time marked by moral outrage and digital disconnection? So my research turns to a perhaps unexpected source, Jeong, a Korean concept of deep emotional and relational attunement. To explore how we might reimagine practice, especially in pedagogical settings. Let me begin with a case that brings cancel culture into shaper focus. In 2022, Sam Okir, a Ghanaian born TV personality active in South Korea, posted a photo on Instagram of a Korean high school student participating in a graduation event. That student were wearing blackface makeup as part of a group performance. In his post, Okir criticized the act as offensive and not funny at all, referring to it as racially insensitive. He uses the word ignorant and included a controversial hashtag, T-pop, a phrase that combined T in inner slang for exposing truth or gossip with K-pop. His intention was to raise awareness about anti-Black racism, especially from perspective of someone who had long experienced racial microaggressions in Korea. He posted quickly backfired. Many Korean netizens accused him of publicly shaming students, violating their privacy by uploading their faces without consent, and disrespecting Korean culture. Some saw the hashtag as mocking K-pop itself, while others framing his critic as presumptuous or ungrateful given his success in Korean media. The outrage intensified rapidly. So within days, Okir was subjected to online harassment. His past comments were scrutinized, and a digital narrative began to circulate that painted him as arrogant and disrespectful. Excuse me. Despite apologizing and deleting the post, he was essentially blacklisted from Korean media for nearly 2 years. So what happened here? Okir's effort to call out racism, arguably a moral and ethical gesture, were reframed as a personal attack. The emotional charge of his message, combined with the visibility of the image and cultural sensitivity around the foreign critic, turned to potentially meaningful conversation about racial awareness into a moral controversy. Rather than becoming a site for dialogue or mutual reflection, the online space became a site of public punishment. This case illustrates how cancel culture operates not just as accountability, but as effective policing, a mechanism through which boundaries are drawn around who gets to speak, how, and at what cost. So this dynamic raises a pressing pedagogical question. How might educators resist these cycles of moral simplification and instead cultivate ethical practices that foster empathy, contextual understanding, and mutual accountability? By reimagining empathy not as a mere emotional reaction, but as an embodied and dialogical practice, education can counteract reactive moralism and open space for sustained and relational engagement. So empathy is often misunderstood as a soft and irrational feeling, but research across the neuroscience, moral psychology, and cultural studies shows that empathy is not a barrier to ethical reasoning. It's a very foundation of it. Emotions aren't just private reactions; they are embodied, social, and culturally shaped. So in digital spaces, however, empathy is fragile. Online platforms reward speed and outrage, not patience or perspective taking. This leads to moral oversimplification, performance judgment, and what some call empathy erosion. So studies shows um, uh, uh, studies shows we don't naturally feel for others online, especially when we are distanced from their experience or socially removed from their pain. That's why empathy must be reimagined, not as a passive feeling, but as an embodied and dialogical practice. This means slowing down and listening across the differences and staying present in discomfort. It's not about agreement or resolution, but about holding a space for mutual recognition and ethical vulnerability. Let's take a close look at what research tells us about empathy in digital space. First, studies by Nordgren, Barnes, and McDonald shows that our ability to judge someone else's pain isn't just shaped by what we believe about suffering. It's shaped by how emotionally close we feel that person to that person. So in other words, if we don't feel personally connected, we are more likely to underestimate their pain. So, and unfortunately, general disapproval or online criticism doesn't fix this bias. What does help is embodied experience, actually feeling or witnessing exclusion ourselves. So this is important because empathy doesn't just develop through exposure. We don't get more empathetic just by being online more often. Research shows that empathy online needs structured feedback and embodied emotional engagement to be sustained. So Antonio Damasius' work on somatic markers helps explain why. He shows that emotions are not just in our mind, they are bodily responses shaped by past experiences. So online, when we witness someone being shamed, canceled, that doesn't just stay on the screen. It creates a kind of emotional memory in our bodies, a warning signal that says, don't speak up, don't take risk. So this fear of cancellation becomes a kind of moral conditioning, regulating how we behave. And Jonathan Haidt adds to this by pointing out that morality binds and blinds. It can create a strong group loyalty, but that same loyalty can make it harder to see from another perspective. So without ethical group grounding, empathy can actually reinforce exclusion, not reduce it. But the good news is it can also work the other way. When digital spaces support digital empathy, where people feel genuinely heard and emotionally safe, those positive emotional experience also leave a mark. So they create somatic memories of trust and openness, which makes ethical dialogue more possible in the future. So ultimately, empathy online doesn't just happen. It has to be practiced and designed for. Pedagogically, this means empathy should be practiced, not just as a virtue, but as a method of ethical engagement through listening and contextualizing again and resisting reactive judgment. So to meaningfully teach empathy, especially in environments shaped by moral reactivity and digital disconnection, we need an ethical grounding. This is where Jeong offers a rich framework. While cancel culture often relies on emotional intensity to exclude, Jeong emphasized emotional endurance and relational attunement. Rooted in Korean culture, Jeong is difficult to fully translate. He combined the characters for heart and blue-green, with blue symbolizing vitality and emotional flow, flesh, sprout, and living water. So Jeong is more than love or compassion. It blinds agape, eros, solidarity, and empathy into a relational ethic that is deeply effective, embodied, and often stronger than moral principle alone. So according to Wonijo, Jeong carries a transformative potential because it does not divide helper and helped. So it emphasizes with, not for. So one-sided. So it grows through sustained bodily and emotionally interaction. So Jeong is not just a feeling, it is a moral sensibility shaped over time, not through abstract rules, but through shared vulnerability and emotional sedimentation. As a fact, theorists like Sarah Ahmed and Lauren Ballant reminds us, emotions circulate and accumulate socially. So Jeong likewise is not spontaneous. It builds over time through relational repetition. It can include moral ambiguity, like favoritism or unhealthy loyalty. But when reflexively practiced, it encourages mutual care and emotional accountability. Here are three dimensions of Jeong's ethical formation. Jeong develops through physical presence and emotional resonance, and Jeong grows slowly, requiring emotional investment and may extend beyond the closer ties to moral solidarity. And Jeong becomes an effective moral framework, guiding ethical motivation, but requiring discernment when reciprocity fails. So once internalized, Jeong shaped subjectivity, not by abstract duty, but by emotional joy and relational memory. So it resonates with Vieta's idea of subjectification, but emphasizes embodied rather than purely cognitive formation. So unlike cancel culture's moral severance, Jeong differs judgment and holds space for repair, even amid betrayal or shame. It encourages the inner eye of affective discernment, so fostering ethical patience rather than punitive immediacy. So this is especially urgent in digital context. Online, emotions collapse into reaction. Group-based effect replace discernment, but Jeong offers a pedagogy of listening time, structured delay before response to cultivate emotional reflection instead of erupting emotional reprisal. So ultimately, Jeong is not about erasing moral boundaries. It is about making room for complex emotional knowledge and sustained ethical imagination. So one of the most powerful ways to cultivate relational empathy in education is through storytelling. From a Jeong ethic perspective, storytelling is not simply self-expression. It is a relational, embodied, and emotionally layered act. Emotions like Jeong do not arise in a vacuum. They accumulated over time, shaped by memory, social position, and unspoken histories. A compelling example comes from Ira's classroom project in response to cancel culture. In this project, students were invited to anonymously share personal stories about how they experienced the uh, race in the classroom. These stories were then posted publicly, allowing peers and faculties to witness the emotional impact of everyday interactions. But the project didn't stop here. Students also recorded 1-minute video reflections responding to prompts such as a moment when they stood for or failed to stand for their values. And how they were raised to see others' communities and how they want to change, and the fear they carry in imagining themselves in a more inclusive future. This structure created a multi-layered emotional space, not just for disclosure, but for mutual recognition. The students engaged not only as speakers, but also as listeners. And through that process, they began to witness each other's not as moral traits, but as complex feeling subjects. This is precisely what Jeong makes possible, a refusal to collapse identity based harm into moral finality, and an insistence on staying emotional present even when we are uncomfortable. Another example comes from Daya's research with middle school ESL students in Canada. After reading multicultural texts about immigration, racism, and laws, students were asked to first write down how their bodies respond. Before speaking, they noted tension and confusion, even silence. Only they share their reflections in small groups, while others practice the deep and attentive listening. Through their activities, students recognize that emotions are not only personal, they are shaped by culture, memory, and power. So by linking storytelling with bodily awareness, this practice taught them how to feel with others, not just speak about them. It transformed empathy into a relational practice, layered, reflective, and enduring. And the second pedagogical practice is ethical imagination. In the context of cancel culture and reactive moral climate, imagination allows a student to stay with unfamiliar others, even those they might disagree with. Marcel Nussbaum described imagination as a way of inhabiting the lives of others and training moral perception. But Jeong expands this idea. It insists that imagination must be emotionally sustained, not fleeting sympathy, but enduring presence with suffering and complexity. A vivid example comes from one study on climate justice education. In this intervention, university students read immense, emotionally charged future scenarios. Fictional but realistic stories about environmental collapse and community displacement. Afterwards, they participated in structured group discussion to process their emotional responses. Many students reported deep emotional engagement. Some even described grief for places they'd never visited or people they'd never met. What made this powerful was not just the scenario itself, but the shared emotional processing. This dialogical embodied activity fostered not only empathy, but what we might call effective stamina, the ability to remain present with moral discomfort and use that presence to imagine just futures. In Jeong ethics, imagination is not just a cognitive exercise. It becomes a form of relational resistance, a refusal to rush to closure or to dehumanize. So Joel describes Jeong as a transgressive power that opens possibility for coexistence even in pain. In this way, imagination is a practice of co-suffering and ethical hope. And the third practice, last practice, centers on vulnerability, not as a weakness, but as an ethical commitment to remain emotionally open to in the presence of others. In the paced digital cultures, vulnerability often personalized, but from the Jeong ethics perspective, vulnerability is not something to avoid. It's something to stay with. So, Aurel and Clement offer a concept of a brave space as an alternative to traditional safe space. So rather than promise comfort, they suggest setting shared agreement that recognize conflict and tension as necessary part of learning. Guidelines like controversy with civility and owning intentions and impact invite people into mutual accountability without demanding in uniformity. However, from a Jeong ethics perspective, this model, while important, may still remain procedural if it fails to attend to emotional histories and embodied realities that participants bring with them. So to deepen this, I propose a complementary practice, emotional timeline sharing. So in these activities, students are invited to virtually, visually map significant emotional experience, like moments of joy, loss, laughter, or silence that shaped how they respond ethically today. These timelines are then shared in pairs or small groups, followed by structured reflective check-ins. So what this does is bring emotion into the loom, not as reaction, but as relational history. It helps the participants see that our ethical instincts are not neutral. They are shaped by memory, pain, and positionality. So this makes Jeong-based vulnerability possible, not as dramatic confession, but as a sustained attunement to how emotions move between us over time. So rather than simply avoiding harm or managing disagreement, this practice encourages students to build ethical patience, to stay with discomfort, witness others' emotional trajectories, and practice mutual holding. In Jeong terms, this is how ethical presence becomes pedagogical. So, rather than seeking instant clarity or moral closure, Jeong calls us to attend to the texture of a situation, not just events, and to remain present with others whose meanings unfold slowly. In the age when information overwhelms and algorithms accelerate division, ethical learning requires not more speed, but more time. Time to feel, wait, and reflect. Thank you.
So our second presenter is Dr. Michael William Dr. Michael William Draghi. Michael has been in pastoral ministry and religious education for over 30 years, predominantly focusing on adolescent formation. Michael received his PhD in practical theology from the University of Pretoria and has been working as a postdoctoral researcher at the Connector Project, a collaboration between Yale Divinity School and Eastern Mennonite University, which investigates the intersection between faith formation and childhood attachments. Michael has recently been appointed as lecturer in pastoral care at Yale Divinity School and lives in New York City. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for the opportunity to present to you today. I love being in this community. This is my first year of really being in the REA, and I can already express my excitement about the collaboration that's here. I love being in communities like this where we build on each other's work. My work is certainly built on the work that many of you have already done, particularly in the ways that we engage a collaborative pedagogy. I'm also deeply grateful for the work of my two colleagues that are here today. They certainly enhance my own work, and I do hope that mine enhances theirs. Engaging Parker Palmer is not a new field when it comes to religious education, not even when it comes to digitality. Mary Hess is here. Her work applied Palmer to digital religious education 20 years ago. So I don't intend to simply repeat their work. My contribution is more specific. It intends to explore the questions of epistemology and authority. Those seem to be at the heart of our digital age wonderings and some of our digital age panic. I came to this subject matter quite by happenstance. I was asked to teach a digital component to the homiletics offerings at Drew Theological School. And at first, I thought I was simply going to engage digital modalities and help my students learn how to utilize new media for traditional proclamation. I was doing that through COVID, and I continued to do it. And it seemed like I was the logical one to teach a class how to do it. But as a result of the research I did for the course and the contributions of the students during the course, I started wondering if the new media landscape was providing something more than just new tools for proclamation or new ways of communication, but it was trying to teach us something far more important about how we know, or our epistemology. I write in the paper that this particular suggestion that the challenge for religious education is not how to keep up with the latest digital modalities, but to understand how theology is formulated and assimilated into consciousness. We need the people who are skilled at whatever tool presents itself. But if we simply chase the tool, like I see so often happen in religious education, it becomes easy to get distracted from the intent of religious education or religious formation. I have to move my notes. My apologies. I'm not even going to pretend like I'm being that slick. The goal in our movement together, the things we're doing in religious education, is embodied truth, not memorized or regurgitated truth. Truth as wonder, truth as curiosity, truth that becomes breath in our lungs. Discipleship isn't the recitation of facts, but it's our relationship with the truth. In most of our collective memory, how we form truth has been forged in the fire of an authoritative epistemology, where there is a truth holder who is responsible to pass truth to a truth needer. That has put religious education square in the middle of a crisis, at least how I see it. On the one hand, people are not coming to religious educators for truth in the way that they've done in generations past, at least by the numbers. Yet, on the other hand, there's also this vast world of uncontrollable wild truth that we all see and that we know is available, whether it's through Google or social media or through AI. And it's easy to understand why there's this feeling of crisis in many religious education circles. In the last decade, work in digital space is often trying to form strategies for how to be a louder voice, or at least just a more trafficked voice among the cacophony. But we find that our struggles are marginal at best. We are finding our efforts are not exactly cracking the code. Statistically, we're still on a downward trajectory. I thought about the imagery of we are influencers without much influence. In a world where there is a truth and we are responsible for that truth, we are in trouble in religious education. What this research is suggesting as a way forward is not a new modality or even a new skill, but to invite religious education into a different orientation toward the technoculture. So technoculture is a word that I probably should define real briefly. Technoculture is the reciprocal relationship between a technology and a culture. In other words, we shape technology, but technology also shapes us, and in turn we shape technology back. There's a reciprocity in the creation of technology. We make a technology for our own purposes, and then that technology shapes how we relate, how we think, or how we not think, and even how we cook. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Here's a bit of technology: the television. Now, the television was invented for one particular purpose: to send moving pictures to receivers on the other end of the electronic transmission that, of course, would be viewed by an audience. But it's responsible for other cultural changes, namely the TV dinner. So the TV dinner is something that existed prior to the invention of the television. It wasn't called a TV dinner, it was just pre-packaged frozen meals. Those existed. But the television allowed it to be called a TV dinner. And there was surge in these pre-packaged frozen meals that had existed for about a decade prior to the invention of the television. And of course, that different cultural movement gave us how we understand microwave meals and this whole industry of quick and fast food, just as a result of the invention of the television. That is an example of technoculture. It works the same way with theology, because theology is culturally and contextually crafted within a technoculture. Here's a simple example from the ancient world: a road. This is a Roman road. A Roman road was an innovation. It was an invention of the ancient world. It was an invention of empire that also shaped empire. The uniting of the cultures around the Roman Empire, represented by the road, had an effect on theology because it took a local Semitic theology, the Jesus movement, and it turned it into a European theology, which became a global phenomenon. This is simply as a result of the road. And as technology kept increasing, the church kept looking to new technologies and the culture being shaped by it. We keep talking about the printing press. Maybe I should put in votes for the road as a more impactful thing. But the idea of the printing press, that didn't automatically start reformations and revolutions, but the culture shaped the new technology and put words in the hands of people. And as a result of people wanting more words, they wanted more and more words, because words in the hands of people then move the epistemological locus out of the authority figures, mostly the clergy at that point, and moved it into the hands of people, creating a technoculture. And this had impact not just on religion, but in politics and in everything else that we can imagine. Understanding technoculture then inspires, if we look at it the right way, if we understand technoculture, it inspires religious leaders and thinkers to inquire with technology, not just about it or around it or our own relationship to it, but think about with technology and ask what it is showing us about what it means to be human, or more specifically in our case, how we learn or form religious belief. To ask those questions about that reciprocity, to ask questions about that tension between culture and who we are as people. So I engage predominantly with Parker Palmer, not because, well, let me say this. I engage with Parker Palmer predominantly because I wanted to root my epistemological and pedagogical argument before the advent of runaway social media or AI as a theological tutor. I wanted to take it and I wanted to show that this is a conversation that we've been having before our present, let's call it crisis, for lack of a better word. You have the paper, so I simply want to summarize the argument that I'm trying to make. The more common understanding of education, which is really the top-down method, or what Freire called the banking method, which is certainly going to be referenced in this session a couple of times, was being criticized long before our digital age conversations ever emerged. The digital did put these critiques in ultra 4K, the same way COVID put certain aspects of our culture and what we need to do in kind of this high technicolor, by revealing how humans actually do form truth. We form it in social engagement. Castaneda terms this expansive social formation as hypersocial, meaning that social epistemology has eclipsed objectivism as a source of truth. He says we live in a network society where knowing, so emphasis on that word knowing, where knowing is increasingly hypersocial. Knowing is just our epistemology, how we know, how we form our understanding of what is true, ontological understandings, however you want to put that. What we know is the core of truth is hypersocial. That means that we can no longer exist in this fantastical idea that I've often seen in religious education circles in the past generation, that we would someday, we're going to get it right. We're going to crack the code so we can return to the good old days of Sunday school, that we don't have to change our sanctuaries with the pews all facing forward, that we'll be able to figure it out. But that's not going to happen because of this hypersociality. We've left this idea of objective truth being presented by an authority figure. Religious education now requires serious engagement with social epistemology if we're going to keep up. Parker Palmer frames this as the objectivist myth, the myth that truth exists somewhere outside of the educator. He illustrates it this way: truth exists outside of the educator. It's accessed by this expert through a porous but unclear barrier, and delivered to students through yet another porous but unclear barrier. The educator or expert's job is to be the one who is between the object and the ones receiving the knowledge. Parker invites us to reorient to truth by de-objectifying it. He suggests that truth is an eternal conversation about things that matter, conducted with passion and conducted with discipline. In other words, it's the conversation that matters, because conversation is relational and it demonstrates a dynamic relationship to the truth. If we are engaging the truth, then we are discovering the truth and allowing the truth to be embedded within us. Palmer's argument is that truth is inherently relational. Truth itself is inherently relational. We form a relationship with the truth, and that relationship is best formed in communities that he calls a community of truth. In a community of truth, the subject is placed at the center of the community. It's intended to be engaged and related to. The passion and discipline that he referred to earlier allows for no one person to have control over the situation, but a commitment to allow the conversation to flow within the parameters of what each member brings to the conversation. And of course, the discipline, and I talk about this in the paper, I won't go deeply into it, the role of the teacher is to create and protect these environments so that they really are safe spaces, so that people are being respected and cared for and not injured, and so on and so forth. Parker suggests that teaching is the creation of space where a community of truth is practiced. That's our job, to create that space so that this process can occur. Because the teacher is in the same relationships with the scripture and traditions of their faith community, and they emerge in this scenario as a fellow learner rather than an authority figure who has all the answers. The issue of authority then becomes a sticky one. This is one that's worth addressing, and I've heard this come up this week multiple times. If those of us who are formed by mythical objectivism are kind of stressed about the authority idea, how do we ensure that what is produced in these communities is true? I'm suggesting that that's the myth part of the mythical objectivism. We never could ensure that everything that happens inside of our classes or inside of our communities of learning has been true. Because see, religious truths have always gone through filters of subjectivity, culture, context, and personality to land in our lap. And we get to engage in that same process with our students, using culture and context and personality to reform that truth for wherever we are and whoever we are, honoring the agency of our learners, our knowers, and the presence of God that already exists within them, meaning that our job becomes to make meaning with our communities around the subjects that we are trying to engage. The ship has long sailed when it comes to institutional authority, but we can develop credibility through authenticity. And you'll see some studies referenced in the paper, some European studies about recognizing that the key thing that makes influencers is this idea of authenticity, the ability to connect and to feel like the influencer is being authentic. Let me give you the rest of Castaneda's quote that'll bring us to this issue of authority. He says, we live in a network society where knowing is increasingly hypersocial. We covered that, but contingent not on institutional authority, but communal validation. Now, that may cause some of us to react. The communal validation idea might be scary, as if we are doing truth by democracy, but that's not what it is. Communal truth seekers are looking for belonging, and they're looking for authenticity. Truth today is often shaped by what's shared, liked, or algorithmically promoted. That is both democratizing, which is great, but also destabilizing, which could be good or bad. If we lean into this Pomeranian corrective, where it's dialogue, not authority or virality, that forms the basis for truth, the church can ultimately become a safe haven where participants can be celebrated, considered, integrated, and formed based on the wisdom of the community, guided by the wisdom of the educator, the wisdom of traditions, the wisdom of spirit, and of course, everything held together by love. I did want to make one more note that this can happen digitally and analog. In fact, it should be. One of the points I make in the paper is that a community of truth relies on a ministry of presence to be deeply effective. This is challenging online, but even when mediated online, our task is to enflesh the incarnational presence of God in whatever community we exist, whether online or whether in person. And our online experiences should be extensions of what's happening within gathered community. We want to form a community of passionate and curious and faithful learners who don't objectify the truth, but who deeply relate with the truth, whether online or offline, and feel the agency to have relationship with the truth and with us, has been so articulately already communicated throughout this week. That is my time. I want to honor my time, and I really appreciate your attention.
Hey. Well, thank you, Michael, for your presentation. So perhaps we can show appreciation also for Michael and with our reaction symbols and whatnot. Okay. Our third presenter is Sister Yen Do. Yen is a member of the Missionary Sisters of Mary Queen in Vietnam. She is a PhD student at Fordham University, New York. Her research interests focus on Christian love and faith formation for young Vietnamese. Yen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for being here. I am going to share my screen. I am very happy to share with you my research paper on the topic of social media guiding Vietnamese youth to communicate with love. In the research showed that 53% of the population in the world uses social media. And among these users, youth are the most vulnerable age group who spend the most time online and are at risk of social media. In a survey with 379 young Vietnamese participants, researchers found that 12% of Vietnamese youth spend more than 8 hours daily on social networks, while others spend 4 to 6 hours. This reality shows that Vietnamese youth are deeply engaged in online interactions with one another and the world. Therefore, the question is not whether the young Vietnamese youth should use social media, but rather how they can use these platforms in a healthy way that benefits for themselves and others. And this paper will design a workshop to invite young people to discuss how to use social media to communicate positively and lovingly with their online neighbors and to contribute to the common good. And my paper section organized in 3 sections. The first one is the use of social media and its impact. And the second section is theological and ethical reflection on the use of social media. And the third one is educational workshop for Vietnamese youth. And we will go to the first section of the paper. Social media is an online platform used to exchange information and build relationships among people. Research has shown that Vietnamese youth mostly use social media such as Facebook, TikTok, Zalo, YouTube, and Instagram. They use social media for entertainment, communication, and information updates. Another study found that 100% of Vietnamese adolescents use Facebook, and a significant number of young people tend to overuse social media, and very few participants reported that they consider their posts carefully before sharing. And the impact of misusing social media. First, the misuse of social media can lead to self-inflation. Young people are often curious about themselves and the lives of others. So this fosters narcissism and self-absorption. For example, female teens can spend hours in front of their phone screens trying digital makeup. This narcissism can lead young people to develop an inaccurate sense of their self-identity. Second, the misuse of social media leads to comparison among youth. The use of Facebook particularly creates social pressure on youth. They seek likes and comments by sharing their personal lives through photos or events. When they see others' Facebook posts receive more likes, they often feel pressured and share more attractive pictures or messages in hopes of garnering positive reaction from online audiences. Their sense of self-worth is not shaped by their true self, but by how others perceive them. This might distort perception and also lead them to use hurtful words or reactions to belittle others. And the third, misuse social media can cause significant harm to oneself. Unlimited social media use poses health risks. Misuse of these platforms can cause loss of privacy, exposure to fraud, and increased risk of cyber attacks. The spread of fake news on social media can can create confusion and pressure among users. It can also lead to social withdrawal and psychological problems such as anxiety and peer pressure. Fourth, misusing social media can harm others and damage relationships. A study shows that playing violent video games and engage with certain social media platforms can promote aggressive behaviors, leading to issues such as racism and cyberbullying. Other researchers emphasize that social media also can encourage teens to use offensive language, hate speech, and cyber pornography. And then the next section, we will explore the theological and ethical reflection on the use of social media. Digital tools such as social media are not inherently unethical. Instead, they can be seen as gifts from God for the contemporary world. They can produce either positive or negative effects for users and society, depending on how users engage them. When used appropriately, social media can have significant positive outcomes. Kurt Bingaman argues that God's love and care for the present world manifested in human technological endeavors. He asserts that technology reflects divine presence and creativity, emphasizing that God is always doing a new thing. Rather ignore or resist the digital world, Bingaman encourages active engagement with it. He contends that resisting the use of technology losing meaningful theology and overlooks the reality of young people as digital natives. However, entering digital space requires careful consideration and responsible use. The primary concern regarding using social media should be respecting human dignity. Catholic social teaching draw from Genesis 1, verse 27, teaches that the human person is created in the image and likeness of God. Being created in God's image grants humans the ability to make choices freely in a way that other creatures cannot. When one posts inappropriate images of oneself, that person shows a lack of respect for the self-image that God created. Similarly, posting racist messages or belittling someone indicates a disregard for the dignity of others. Being created in the image of a genuine God who always coexists in a relationship means that humans are inherently social beings. We are related to one another and bear responsibility for each other. When using social media, it is important to commit ourselves that our concerns should not be about bias, avatars, or lies, but about people. Our purpose of online communication should be to build relationship and care for each other. And to build the right relationship virtually, it is important to have proper communication on social media. The Dicastery of Communication of the Catholic Church calls us to pay attention to the wounded people who have been injured by our online acts of ignorance and carelessness. Based on the parable of the Good Samaritan, the document suggests individuals live in the digital world as loving neighbors who truly care for others. It states, quote, along the digital highways, many people are hurt by division and hatred. we cannot ignore it. We cannot be just silent passerby. In order to humanize digital environments, we must not forget those who are left behind, unquote. The document reminds us that our online posts, comments, and likes under any form of pictures, writing, or speaking should reflect our love for one another. We reflect and discern before posting anything online to ensure our communication is truthful and loving. In addition to being mindful of our communications on social media, the document also suggests building solidarity with others near and far. Quote, to be neighborly on social media means being present to the stories of others, especially those who are suffering, unquote. We should engage in social media beyond the exchanging of information. We use it as space to promote faith and the common good. And the document guides us on social media. We should discern before acting, to treat all people with respect, to respond with a question rather than a judgment. We are present on social media to communicate kindness and love. And the next section will present a workshop designed to guide Vietnamese youth in a Catholic parish about the effective use of this online platform. To guide Vietnamese youth on the use of social media, I plan to open a weekend workshop. The workshop is divided into 2 evenings of the weekend during Lent. It aims to help learners to be aware of negative impacts of the misuse of social media and encourage them to use these platforms with responsibility and discernment. The workshop provides young people with opportunities to reflect on and discuss their experiences of using social media. This workshop based on Paulo Frere's problem posing, Thomas Groom's shared Christian praxis method, and reflect on Catholic social teaching. The process of the workshop, the first is a focusing activity. It means 2 weeks before the workshop, I will post articles and images on the parish bulletin board about the impacts of social media on youth, both positive and negative. This information purposely draws attention and thoughts of the young people before getting them to the actual workshop. When we get into the workshop, I divide in 2 evenings. The Saturday evening, the purpose is to reflect on the impact of using social media in young people's life by sharing their own practices and reflecting on the church teaching. Young people will be inspired to be open to new possibilities of using social platforms as a way of expressing their love for others. And this section will include 3 activities. The first one is the impacts of using social media through art. So I will encourage them to draw what they think reflect on their use of social media. And the second activity is discuss experience on using social media. And the third one is present a brief presentation on the use of social media and also include a discussion. The second day, Sunday evening, the purpose is to inspire Vietnamese youth to make a communal and personal commitment to the use of social media for the good of others and society. And it includes 4 activities. First one, I will present color activities as a model for youth in using social media. And the second activity is a communal commitment. Young people will reflect on the question, how can you collaborate to make social media a place where love for online neighbors is visible? And the third activity is the discussion on the use of social media and Catholic social teaching in 5 areas. Human dignity. Youth is a time of self-absorption and self-creation. As young people strive to enhance their self-image, but sometimes do not do so in appropriate ways, I will invite them to discuss how can I show my care for my own dignity and the other dignity in my use of social media. And regarding the second area, responsibility, online communications can negatively impact a global audience, especially among young people. It is crucial for young individuals to take responsibility for their posts. I will invite them to discuss the question, how can I demonstrate my responsibility in using social media to avoid harming myself and others? And regarding the third aspect of the family, youth is the time when individuals tend to engage more with friends rather than parents and family. I will invite the learners to discuss with the person sitting next to them, how much should I use social media at home so it can do not harm my family relationship? And the next area is right to work. The young people are encouraged to use their talents and technological skills to make a positive impact and contribute to a better world. So they will discuss the question, what can I contribute in online communication to create a better world? And the next area regarding option for the poor. In the context of social media, the poor refers to individuals who suffer from negative online interactions. I will invite them to discuss, is there any specific victim that I want to care about? And the last area is regarding solidarity. It is important for parents, youth mentors, and teachers to stand in solidarity with young people regarding their use of social media. Therefore, I will pose a final question for discussion in a larger group. What has been your most influential idea or activity from this workshop? By that, I can survey the idea and improve for the next workshop. And the last activity is a personal commitment. After a few minutes of silent reflection, I will invite young people to freely share their convictions through spontaneous prayer. Saying their commitment in the form of prayers can give them a sense of a promise they make to God and one another. They trust that God will help them to practice their commitment to using social media for peace and good. I also believe listening to others' commitment will inspire them to contribute to the common good. My invitation before I end my presentation is that in this online journey, it is essential for religious educators to create environment that encourage young people to reflect on their online communication. This reflection should ensure that their virtual interactions respect their own dignity as well as the dignity of others. The goal of their posts and comments should be alleviate suffering, provide support, and promote the common good in society. To achieve this, it is important for young people to pause and think before posting or commenting. Consider the potential impact their messages may have on their peers and a global audience. Social media platforms can serve as a powerful spaces for offering comfort to a wounded world through messages of love. And a reflection question for you to ponder as a teacher, parent, or adult. How do you encourage young people to use social media platform positively? Thank you so much for your listening.
Hey, well, thank you, Yan, for your presentation. And again, could we maybe show our appreciation for Yan with reactions like the applause reaction? Okay. So I want to encourage us to just take a few moments to reflect on the presentations and decide what questions you want to ask. In a minute, we will open the floor for a question and answer period. I will monitor the chat. If anyone has any questions they would like to ask, you may also raise your hand to ask a question. So I'll just give it a couple of seconds. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's begin the Q&A. So to start us off, I have a question that I just want to ask the presenters, and I was hoping maybe all three of them could respond to it. And that is, all the papers touch on the necessity of dialogue to engage with the problems and opportunities posed by social media. How do we invite others to enter into dialogue amid the climate of polarization that exists today? And perhaps Michael, perhaps you could lead us off on it.
Let me unmute. Really, you're talking about addressing polarization, like that's at the crux of the question. Yeah, and I noticed the question that came up also in the chat about things like QAnon and things like that, which I feel like kind of dovetails into this idea. Beginning with the idea of polarization, I think as we come in, we assume people don't want to be polarized. I think we have to engage in that idea that people want to be in relationship. That ultimately beginning with the idea that they've come to their truth in an honest way, and for sometimes, particularly the truths that are absolutely anathema, like there are horrifying truths, at least that through a particular lens. And I find myself with those trying to ask myself the question, how did they get to those truths, and what is the motivation behind them? What is the heart? What are they trying to seek? I mean, Sting used to have that song back in the 80s that the Russians love their children too. Like that's the idea, to assume that we're all trying to go the same place, and try and find that place where we're all beginning. But then really in the role of the experts, and so I'm going to dovetail that in with my answer to the question. The idea of experts is that I think we have to enter into a particular bit of expertise. It's about how we wield that expertise, because everybody has experts that they're citing. But to be able to communicate it in such a way to say, well, I'm discovering this idea. This is what it seems, the research seems to show. What are you thinking about that? And as long as I think we're creating a safe space within our dialoguing communities, I think that we have to trust the idea that the truth will eventually emerge, even though it might take a lot of time. And it's not going to happen because I'm shouting over somebody, or I'm digging in, because algorithmically, it's not just happening digitally. We live algorithmically. We attend the church that confirms our biases. We go to the coffee shops and we have friends that confirm our biases. But if we're not willing to do the hard work of being in groups of people that we just think their ideas are absolutely disgusting, and look for why they love their children and what it is that they're afraid of, we're never going to get into a place where we're in relationship with one another, which I think is the goal.
Eliana, Yan, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
Oh, yes. So one of my key arguments is the empathy cannot be summoned through regional law. So it must be embodied and sustained, emotionally scaffolded. So like in polarized environment, simply asking just people to dialogue often fails because emotional condition for dialogue haven't been established. So for me, rather than seeking quick resolution, invite people to stay emotionally present with discomfort, to invite others into dialogues, especially in, again, polarized setting. We must first slow down the modal tempo. That means just making space for effective accumulation, for listening, for silence, and for, narrative complexity.
Yan, you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, thank you for both my college, and I really agree with both of you that we need to create a space, and this space needs to be safe in order to begin our dialogue. And in this dialogue, we need to like pay attention to the listening, listen not just to listen, but listen deeply in order to understand with respectfully, and understand not like we understand them in our view, but understand them in their perspective. That is the listening that I want to emphasize on the dialogue.
Okay, thank you, Yan. So we have a question. We have a couple of questions in the discussion in the chat over here. And I think that Michael already spoke partly to one of them, and that is the first one is how does technical expertise, that is the expertise of educators, fit into your reflections on truth? And I have a similar question, and that is how do you balance speaking authoritatively while also providing options for others to participate in conversations? How do you strike that balance?
I mean, I'll just mention I love education. I'm a PhD, and I'm only thing I'm frustrated about being a PhD is that's a terminal, that there's not the next one that I can go to. But I love to learn, and I research a lot, and I love research, and I love education, and I think that there's a role for it. I think it's about, and I'm just going to offer this as a thought, I think it's about the posture, not about the information itself. I think coming into a group as with knowledge is like, you have to know the terms. Like I tell my theology students, I want you to know the hard theology terms and when not to use them. When because if you go into a situation with full guns ablazing, you're going to lose folks. But the ability to be in a room and say, I'm a fellow learner. I went out into the field and I want to bring this that I've learned back into this group. And let's wrestle with this idea, this little bit of nugget that I found in my studies, recognizing that I've learned into this group, but I don't have exhaustive knowledge. So again, I think the idea is more about my posture as a learner rather than my posture as an expert, and how that affects me in my educational ability, even though I know probably a lot more about the subject than the people in the
Thank you, Michael. Eliana, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so thank you for this deeply layered question. So I see both parts, like authority and expertise, as touching the same core, the ethical concern. Like, how do we hold the truth in ways that are relationally accountable and rather than hierarchically imposed? So from my research from a Jeong ethics perspective, truth is not a possession to be delivered, but a relational presence that emerges over time through emotional resonance and shared vulnerability. So that means religious educators, like all expertise, are not just transmitters of truth, but like caretakers of the emotional conditions under which truth can be heard and held and questioned. I'm not sure I took right word, caretaker. I don't like this kind of one-sided word. I really emphasize kind of like co-thing, co-guest, co. So for me, preaching is kind of for co-preaching anyway. So in terms of that question, what was the original question? John Palcon, am I right? So I really appreciate the kind of communities of inquiry. So, but as you suggest, even within those kind of community, technical expertise is inescapable, whether that's biblical scholarship, pedagogy, or theological method. But the challenge is that expertise often carries effective weight. It can either open up conversation or shut it down. So for me, Jeong helps us to rethink expertise not as control over information, but as a form of emotional stewardship. So the expert is not the one who has the truth, but one who has willing to stay present with the tensions that truth brings, who resists the finality and makes room for co-discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thank you, Eliana. Yen, would you like to add to that?
I think like religious education practitioner want to balance speaking in authoritative by limiting in lecturing, but promotes asking reflective questions. Like we can see this way, like Jesus do in by the Bible, instead of in the seminarian, he said like instead of saying you have to do this for your neighbor, he said, who is your neighbor? Like he asked reflective question. For example, in the context of religious education, we can ask them like what makes them understand the way they understand, or ask them how, like in my project related to the church teaching, I might ask them how the church teaching connects to your experience. Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Yen. Mary has been talking in the chat about the differences between brave spaces and safe spaces, and my question here is, opening up spaces for dialogue, both safe spaces and brave spaces, is not always straightforward, and I was wondering, how would you encourage religious educationers to begin the process of creating those brave spaces or safe spaces for dialogue?
I really liked, Mary, I appreciate your distinction. I would suggest that I think we need to create space for both of those. I mean, I think bravery comes from a safety, like feeling that sense of safety. And I think, and I absolutely understand that distinction, and I've utilized the brave space rather than safe space. I think particularly in areas of this kind of dialogue, we may have to create spaces where people just breathe for a while. Because the onslaught of what has been considered truth, which is usually this objectification, authority-driven control, has wounded people and wounded a lot of people, particularly the young. And so creating spaces where they don't have to dialogue, they don't have to say anything, they don't have to be anything. That's the safe space part of it. But then as a part of that to encourage that sense of bravery, that can be a tall order. So creating spaces of healing, but that lend itself to spaces of dialogue through my own demonstration of that. They're going to have to see it. They're going to have to see that even weird conversations don't get shut down, but the way that a good educator, a good facilitator cares for the space and treasures everything that happens in the space. I think that's going to have to happen within the safe space before we transfer it into a brave space, which is certainly the goal. I mean, that may be a semantics, but I think that those two things work together.
Paul, this is Paulette. I wonder if I could pose a question to Michael.
Mm-hmm.
So, Michael, I'm just wondering, and again, I thank all the presenters for their presentations, but I'm just wondering, how might this be transferred? And I don't even know if it could be to the sanctuary. So, in particular, through a pastor who's preaching. Do you see where maybe something can be said during the sermon as relates to this? Or not? I know the focus is really on the classroom, but I'm just thinking, more broadly, as the preacher is preaching.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this almost feels strange because it feels like I'm doing the opposite of what I just said. Like, I know there's so much wisdom within this community right here that I would love to be able to hear. I pulled from my class. So my class was a class on preaching. It wasn't a class on religious education. We utilize this idea of monological versus dialogical.
Okay.
And so they actually started critiquing each other. They would do these projects, and then they would kind of say, hey, that's a little monological. Like you would hear them saying that because they're basically critiquing each other to ask the question, is there space for your listeners to participate with you? And how does that happen? And I had mentioned the pew idea, and I'll just say this briefly. Pews were designed for authority. Our modern sanctuaries were designed for an authoritative control structure. So when we look at our church architecture, you think about if we didn't have sanctuaries the way that we have them, and you were asked to design a sanctuary based on a community of truth, it wouldn't look like our sanctuaries, and we wouldn't necessarily it would be different. So I'm just going to say this. I think that what the digital age is bringing us is potentially the end of traditional preaching as we know it. And it's going to require the new homileticians to think in terms of dialogical preaching rather than monological preaching. It's going to be hard to wrestle our preachers out of that idea. But I think we're already past it. But I think you would really find an incredible transformation in our worship services if people came ready to be participants rather than observers. So, but I think that's for the communities themselves to dialogue about, and not necessarily for me to say this is how it should happen. I think each community has to engage that question.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Michael. I think we have just enough time for just a couple of more responses, maybe from Eliana and Yan. I just want to give those two a chance to say something still.
Can I say something about the questions?
Either regarding the safe spaces and brave spaces, and the creation of those, or to the question that was just asked.
So I just want to mention about brave space and safe space. That's a beautiful and insightful observation, and in light of Jeong, the language of a brave space might indeed be more appreciated than safe space. Because when we talk about Jeong, we are not aiming for safety in the conversational sense, where no one gets hurt, nothing is challenges, and everything remains comfortable. But that kind of safe space can actually shut down the emotional depth that Jeong requires. Because Jeong asks us to stay emotionally present even when things get uncomfortable. So in that way, it definitely aligns more closely with the idea of a brave space. So a space where risk, difference, and discomfort are expected and welcomed as a part of growth. But I'd also add this. What Jeong brings to concept of brave spaces, emotional endurance, say again, and relational responsibility. It's not just about courage to speak. It's also about the commitment to stay with the emotional aftermath of what has been spoken. And it's kind of a bravery that doesn't end at the moment of truth telling, but continues in the quiet, awkward, slow work of holding each other's draw it.
Thank you, Eliana. And Yan, I'm giving you the final word here before we wrap things up.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity, especially when I explore the two papers of my college and also myself. So I really appreciate that three of us encourage dialogue in religion education, and by Paul question often refer religion education practitioner. So the important thing is I very agree with Michael, like the teacher not only consider we are a teacher, but also the learner, and maybe the word facilitators or companion is a beautiful word for teaching job. And so I really appreciate and also appreciate all of your presence and question.
Hey, thank you, Yan. And thank you to all of our presenters and also for everyone joining us for this conversation today. It's been really great to have all these questions asked, and I wish everyone all the best with the rest of the conference.